I'm Lauren Listowskis. I'm the program director for Gryt Health, and I'm also a 5-year cervical cancer survivor. And I'm really excited to have you all here today to talk about a really important topic. This is the first part of a 3-part program series that we're doing here at Gryt Health. So our program series is Cancer Research and You. And so it's going to be 3 parts. Today, we're really focusing in on clinical trials, talking all about them, answering your questions, myth busting, all of those fun things. And then next month, we will be talking about patient experience research and the research that Gryt Health does. And then the 3rd and final month in September, which no offense to my speakers, but it's going to be my favorite because we're going to be hearing from patients, survivors, and caregivers who have participated in different types of cancer research. So after today's program, in about a week or so, everyone will get an email sent to them as a follow-up, and I will include the link to rewatch this program and links to register for the future programs. But those can also always be found at grythealth.com/events. So be on the lookout for follow-up emails, extra information, any attachments, answers to any last-minute questions we couldn't quite cover during today. But I'm excited for everyone to be here. And as always, thank you for joining. And our programs are always meant to be informational. This is for everyone to learn new things. None of this is actual medical information that you should take to heart. Any medical questions about you and your treatment diagnosis should always be taken directly to your healthcare team, and those decisions should be made with them. So yeah, thank you again. I'm excited. You guys can drop any questions you have at any time throughout our hour together in the chat, and I will be keeping an eye on that and giving those questions to our speakers today as they come along. So don't hold them in. I know if I have a question, I have to get it out right away. So just put it in the chat and we'll visit it. So again, thanks for being here. And I will hand it over to our first speaker, Dr. Dan Platt, who is Gryt Health's Chief Medical Officer.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So great to see so many old faces and new faces, and thank you for joining. I'll just give a quick introduction of my background and let you know that I'm here to answer questions. And Emily from Ancora and I are going to be walking through some slides. Feel free, as Lauren said, to ask your questions whenever. We'll take a break from slides if we need to answer them directly. We would love for you guys to pepper us with questions and get all these things answered that you really want to know about clinical trials. As Lauren said, I won't be offering medical advice, but I do have a background in medicine. So I did go to the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry and got my MD. Then I went down to Harvard to do my residency, actually in neurology. I became very interested in immuno-oncology because it was just a new burgeoning field, and decided to move into that and learn a lot more. And so did a lot of consulting work for pharma and biotech as this great new area of medicine is growing. And so that's really been kind of a specialty of mine over the last 15 years. So happy to answer questions, and I'll pass it over now to Emily to introduce herself. And we're so happy to have Ancora.ai here and to have their expertise and their really, really great system. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm sure Emily will give you kind of directions on where to find it, but it's an awesome way to locate clinical trials, to find information and educate yourself about how best and what the right trial for you is. And so we're just so excited to be able to partner with them, and looking forward to doing great things in the now and in the future. So Emily, please take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. So excited to see everyone here, and yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited at Ancora to be partnering with Gryt Health on this and other initiatives to really make clinical trials more accessible. So I have a few slides. I'll share my screen, but don't let that stop you from asking questions. Lauren has promised to interrupt me. And I'd love to just focus on, what's important to you. So I have a few things in mind, but definitely very flexible if it's more interesting to talk about something else in the clinical trials world. So I think the basic agenda is I'll give a little introduction to myself and to the team at Ancora. I'll walk through a few of those slides, and then I'll save plenty of time as well at the end to go through any remaining questions. So maybe I'll just introduce myself first. So my name is Emily. As Dan said, I am the co-founder and COO of Ancora.ai. You can see in the top right here my two other co-founders at Ancora, Luca and Danielle. We originally met working in pharmaceutical drug development. We come from very different backgrounds, actually. So Danielle is an amazing technologist. Luca studied medical genetics with a focus on oncology and his graduate research. And I have kind of like Dan, a background in neuroscience, neurobiology. So I have a PhD and a focus in neuroscience, but then went into drug development work for a number of years. And we met when we were working together and on various projects for pharma. And we were really interested in the clinical trials space. But we noticed this kind of common theme that often companies that are developing new treatments for cancer are really focused on physicians. So the customer in this kind of business, if you will, is the physician, because that's who's prescribing the medication, making the treatment plan. And so in the industry, that's where the focus is. And we thought, there are so many problems that patients face, and there's so many burdens that are placed on patients. And we really had this vision that we should make the process of clinical trials easier for patients and much more patient-centric, not just about making drugs that physicians want to use, but also making a positive experience for patients. So that's kind of the vision of how we got started with Ancora. But in a nutshell, what we have built is, you'll see on the bottom left of this slide here, a website which is free for patients to use to look for clinical trials that could be a good fit for them. We're focused completely on oncology, but we also have COVID clinical trials, which are quite interesting sometimes for patients. So people were able to actually get on the vaccine trials pretty early by kind of coming to us, which was interesting for cancer patients. But we always will have this tool for free, and that's kind of a key mission of ours, is just to open up access to this information. We have a couple of other things. So we have a product for doctors, but I won't talk about that today. I really want to focus on how this can help you as a patient or a caregiver. Our team is about 10 people at the moment. You'll see their beautiful faces in this picture. We actually just met a couple of weeks ago for the first time in a very long time. So fresh off with our matching t-shirts here. So the objectives for kind of what I wanted to cover were really to talk about what clinical trials are, what the benefits are to patients, how they work, why they're important for advancing the field in general of cancer research, maybe some misconceptions that you might have heard. We can debunk some myths, and I'm sure Dan can help also kind of brainstorm what you might have heard or what he's heard in treating patients. And then also what's really important to us in the Ancora team is health equity. And that's a key part of why we do what we do, is to democratize access to this information. So I want to take a few minutes also to just talk about what the problems are in clinical trials right now, and maybe a few things that you can do in a personal way to combat those. There are a lot of policy things and things for the medical profession to change as well. But maybe we can just try to explain a few of those. And then also I'll talk about, if you want to look for trials, how you can do that. So it's a lot. If there's particular things you want to hear about, let Laura know in the chat, and I will try to use the time effectively so that we can make sure to get to those. So I'll maybe just walk through this, and then we can stop also for initial questions. But clinical trials, I'm sure you all have some understanding of them already because you're here, and also because there's this pandemic happening, which made clinical trials kind of top of everyone's mind. But in short, clinical trials are a way to test safety and efficacy in a regulated way, especially against existing treatments. So you'll always be comparing a treatment to the standard of care in a clinical trial, because no one would want to use a new product if it wasn't better or safer or more tolerable than existing treatment options. So this is the way that we both discover and develop new therapeutics. And also importantly, how we get them approved by the FDA, so that data that you generate in clinical trials is important for the approval to actually market, sell the drug, for physicians to prescribe it outside of research. And it also is really important in feeding into best practice guidelines. So if you know of ASCO or any association of doctors, they usually work according to treatment guidelines, and clinical trial data are a key part of how those guidelines are developed. There are 3 phases in terms of how clinical trials work: 1, 2, and 3. So early phase to late stage trials. And I'm actually not going to walk into detail on all of those aspects of trial design because it's a pretty meaty topic. But I wanted to point you to, if you're kind of unaware of how trials work, we have a really detailed article on our blog, which I've screenshotted here. So if you go to the Ancora blog and look for clinical trial phases, that there's a full explanation of all the phases and which one might be right for you as well. So I'll stop there. Lauren, is there any burning question?
I don't think we have any questions yet in the chat, but yeah, if anybody does have a question, feel free to throw it in there. I'll be consistently looking at that chat as well, but I'm excited to cover all of this great information and help you guys learn some things. Dan?
I would love to just emphasize one key point that you mentioned, Emily, and that's that trials are additive. So clinical trials don't move backwards. So they're always testing new therapies against the best existing therapy. And a lot of times they're testing it with the standard of care therapy. So a lot of the new drugs are used in combination. We've gotten kind of past the idea of using single therapies for the most part. So it's important to think about this as always moving forward. And this is the way that medicine moves forward. This is the way that we arrive at new treatments and new understanding of what treatments work in what context. And that also, of course, has important implications for peoples of different ethnicities who have different genetics, because there is an impact there. And just people within a race have there's much more difference within a race than there is outside of one. It's an important thing to understand. So genetics are now a huge part of how trials are done and understanding the genotype of the cancer. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, in a little while. But without getting into too many specifics, this is just a really burgeoning field. And I encourage you all to ask questions about your genotype, especially if you're interested in research, because it will help a lot in terms of getting you into the right trial. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. So I'll just, oops, okay. So I guess probably why you're here is you're wondering, like, should I look at clinical trials? Maybe there's something that would be a good fit for me. So I wanted to start walk through what the pros and cons of trials are, because I think there's also a lot of stigma and fear for various reasons, which we'll talk about more. And so a couple of the key pros to be aware of, I think the main most important one is you could get early access to novel therapeutics, so new drugs, new interventions, immunotherapy, cell therapy, these highly targeted therapies based on genotype that Dan mentioned. A lot of those are in clinical trials. A lot of those in indications where there might not be a lot of later line treatment options. So it can be a really good opportunity to try kind of the latest and greatest therapies. That being said, I think a lot of people think of trials as something that you only do when you're a very late stage patient or when you've exhausted all of your other options. And I also want to emphasize that's not always the case. And actually, there are really great opportunities for treatment naive patients, early stage patients, actually at every step of the treatment pathway. And a lot of patients are not aware of that. So these are actually pros, like a good opportunity at any time in many cases. The second big pro is that there's very good, oh, sorry, Dan, I think you wanted to chime in there.
Oh, I just wanted to piggyback on that. That really, for people who are diagnosed, and not just with cancer, but pretty much with any disease, I would say there's a 95% chance, no matter where you are in the journey, no matter what treatments you've received, that you will likely fit into some form of clinical trial or into patient experience research, because there's and this is what Gryt does actually, there's a really burgeoning field of understanding what a patient has been through in order to tailor drug design and drug trials better to the patient experience. And so if only 5% of cancer patients actually make it into a trial. And what Ancora is doing, Emily, what you guys are doing is just so great in terms of getting that number up. But I always just love to emphasize that pretty much everyone has a potential to find a trial that might either work for you in the sense of getting a new therapy or work for you to better understand your experience and your cancer so that patients later on can benefit from that. So sorry to interrupt, Emily. I couldn't emphasize that enough. Thank you.
Absolutely agree. So a couple of the other big pros are just the level of monitoring in medical care. So the whole point of the clinical trial is to look at how a treatment is working across different patients. And so you will have a very high quality medical team who will be watching you very closely, and you'll receive extra tests, maybe extra scans, extra diagnostics, and really have a level of attention that you might not get otherwise. And the third big one, I think, is you could really benefit science. And I think this is really motivating to many patients that they want to give back. They don't want other people to go through maybe what they've been through. And it really contributes to, this building all the research studies that came before and giving something back so that other people can learn from the research. I think a couple of other things I would add in here would be, it's not just about efficacy, but there are a lot of new therapies that might be much more tolerable. There also might be quality of life issues. So for example, there might be new treatment schedules where instead of having an infusion every week, you could do an injection at home or, different things like that. So it's not always just about having a more effective treatment, but there are a lot of other kind of benefits that might come with new products being tested. In terms of the cons, I think this is where people get a little bit scared about clinical trials. I would underline that trials are highly regulated with legal and ethical guidelines around how they're run. So it's not like the Wild West for sure, but there is always a chance that the treatment might not work for you. So it might not be better than the standard of care. You might also not get in the treatment group that you want to be in. So in cancer, there are very, very, very rarely placebo groups. So as Dan and I both said, you will always be with the standard of care or the experimental treatment. But maybe you want the experimental treatment and you don't get it, you get assigned to the other group. You might not know that, depending on the design of the trial, until after. So that could be something that worries people or a reason they're hesitant to participate. There's always, like any treatment, the potential for adverse events to happen, side effects that might not be known before the study, although you will be briefed in the consent process on all the side effects that are known, all the safety data and efficacy data to date. So there is a very formal process for giving you all that information before you agree to participate. And also trials could just be inconvenient for some people depending on where you are in your life and where you live. So you might have to travel for more appointments. You might have to take time off work. We had a patient that we were helping recently, and she traveled 6 hours every 3 weeks to participate in a trial. That was something that she was able to do. Not everyone is able to do that, and it really depends on your situation. So those are a few of the cons. And Dan, I don't know if you have anything you'd want to add here as well.
Yeah, maybe this is a great point to address some of the questions we just got to Lauren. I know that both Betty and Melanie looks like asked questions about reducing travel barriers in clinical trials. I think this is a really, really important discussion to get into. There's a number of ways that are being done. I think a lot of pharma trials are really coming around to the idea that they need to make things better for patients. They need to make things more convenient. So a lot of pharma companies are now paying for travel to and from trial sites. Again, it doesn't get away with the inconvenience of having to travel 6 hours, like you said, Emily, but it does lessen somewhat of the burden in terms of monetary costs. And they'll pay to oftentimes put you up in a hotel if you need to get treatment overnight. So there's a lot more of that going on. So that's number one, and I'm so happy to see those changes. Number two is a lot of advocacy organizations now offer grants for travel. So for instance, Gryt Health is working on a project in chimeric antigen receptor T therapy, or CAR T therapy. And we just happened to find out that LLS, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, has a grant that pays for all travel expenses to get to and from a major medical center. And this is really important in the context of CAR T because it's a treatment that isn't offered at a ton of places. It's a very specialized treatment still, and relatively complicated in terms of its manufacture. So, you can always look at advocacy organizations. They will often help with travel costs as well and try to defer those. But it's getting better, but it still is certainly a hassle. And of course, the third way is to try to expand trials to more community hospitals that are closer to people. And I think, Betty, you might have mentioned the use of telehealth. And so something that's growing are decentralized clinical trials. And I'm sure Emily probably has some opinions about these too, but it's a great way to try to alleviate some of the burden that is placed on patients to make it to the trial site. It's not going to be great for every type of trial. So a lot of oncology trials, because they're testing pretty serious medications, they are more likely to want you on site so they can monitor you and make sure that there aren't any potential bad side effects. But it will make things easier in terms of follow-up, which is a big part of the trial, is making sure that you stay healthy for a long period of time. So that's something we can talk about too. Does that get to some of the questions you asked, Betty and Melanie? Okay, great. Yeah, great info. Awesome. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll pull this back up. Let's see if I can find my way back to sharing here. Yeah, actually, we just shared something on our Instagram yesterday about some resources for travel. I'll try to repost that again. I think it was a story, but I wasn't actually aware there's actually something there's a program where the people who have private jets not in use, like, will give patients a ride, and someone was talking about that and a few other things. But in terms of the decentralized trials, I think it's interesting because I think for the treatment itself, for oncology, like you said, Dan, it's unlikely to change. But for everything around the treatment on trials, there's a lot of other stuff that patients have to do. They have to bring their records. They have to go to a consent appointment. They have to do all these things. And if you have to travel hours every time, like, it's a real barrier. And I am hopeful, and I'm already seeing some of that changing. And I think COVID has actually put a lot of pressure on those. I remember being frustrated with this patient that I mentioned, really frustrated because at the same time I was helping her, we were assisting another patient who was on a COVID trial, and they were doing home visits for like the COVID, for the COVID vaccine trial. So this was a totally healthy young guy. And then meanwhile, this really sick patient was traveling. And I just thought, like, this is crazy. So I'm crossing fingers that changes. I think we've already seen a lot of movement in that direction. And technology is, our company is really a proponent for how we can use technology to make it easier for patients, not just to help companies make more money, which is not the goal here. So I wanted to just highlight as well, now that we've talked about the pros and cons, like, why don't more people do trials? Why is this something that very few people hear about? So they're essential to actually any development in cancer research, cancer treatment. It's also a huge industry for pharma companies, but there are so many problems. So patients actually really have a hard time connecting to trial information. And I'll try to walk through like an example of why that is. Physicians, they understand the information. Most of them, as you'll see this stat on the left, 80% or more in the literature agree that trials benefit patients. But you'll see above that, only 20% of patients are ever told about trials, or actually less than 20%. And this is really because physicians, they have to keep up with the current guidelines. They have a huge patient load. Maybe they're not attached to a research hospital, so they don't have access to kind of the latest things, and they're just, really, really overloaded in terms of time and paperwork. So that's a real barrier. And because patients can't necessarily find the information on their own, it means not many people hear about trials. And then kind of how this affects the whole cancer research space is that trials take longer because they have a hard time recruiting enough patients that are right for the trial. And this means that actually innovation is slower to reach the patients who need it. So the greater population of cancer patients. So this is an extract from ClinicalTrials.gov. And if you've used ClinicalTrials.gov, please comment in the chat how you found it. I won't presume, but we use ClinicalTrials.gov a lot in our early careers, my co-founders and I. And we found it just made us pull our hair out. So this is the search I did this afternoon for breast cancer studies for adults in phase 3. And a lot of people really focus on phase 3 trials because they have the most safety and efficacy data. So if I was a breast cancer patient looking for these trials, I would get 174 results back. And then you click on an option, for example, maybe just the top one, And this is what you see. This is how they tell you who's eligible to be in the trial. So there's inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So you need these things and you can't have these things. And if you're a patient who's looking for clinical trials and you have 174 pages like this, it's just impossible. Like, I don't know anyone, and we've actually met with oncologists who are like looking for their friends and family, and they were unable to do this, even though they understood the information. It's just the scale of, hundreds of trials and hundreds of pages like this. And if you're an average person, you don't know what a SIP is here. It's really tough. So this is why we built the tool that we have on Ancora.ai. We actually did a study on this that we presented at ASCO's GI Symposium earlier this year, where we compared trial search on Ancora to trial search on ClinicalTrialsgov. And we measured a bunch of different things in this study, but ultimately we showed that the search with Ancora improved understanding of the trial information in the different options presented, and also had much greater user satisfaction. And so our vision for this and why we built Ancora is to make sure that any patient can access this information, and we time users actually finding their clinical trial options, and they can get to them in less than 5 minutes, as opposed to 174 pages of just gobbledygook. To maybe I'll tell you a bit more about how Ancora works and how you find a trial, but I just wanted to kind of present this validation piece, and then I just want to talk a bit more about the diversity and democratization aspect of it. But I'll stop there just in case there's anyone wants to interrupt.
I would just love to add about kind of where we're at with ClinicalTrials.com. And I think Emily gave a great summary and showed you guys what some of these pages look like. So ClinicalTrials.gov for me now has become it's a resource for people who are in the field, who are really knowledgeable, like doctors and people like Emily who have done this for most of their life, to find the information that's available, because the government actually mandates that any clinical trial that's done has to be put into this list. So it's a great, it has everything, but it is an awful portal for searching for patients. And we're finally at the point where companies like Ancora, what you guys do is really making it so this isn't a tool that really has to be used by patients to find trials. And I'm so glad we're getting there, because it just really isn't conducive to that. It's conducive to finding a whole bunch of information, but not the right piece of information that patients need. So I think I just want to emphasize what you guys are doing and pulling out the key points and really making it easy to find. I think this will have a huge impact on increasing people's access to trials. Are there any questions? Oh, we just got a question here. That's a great question. Emily, do you want to, or should I take a?
So I actually can't see it. I have to find it because I'm screen sharing. Maybe you can tell me what it is. So click on something. Whoops.
This is from Ibis. So can you discuss comorbidities and how this affects communities of color's involvement in clinical trials?
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think comorbidities and also things like metastases can be a big, like a blocker to clinical trials. And that's interesting, like how it's associated also with certain population types. So one problem with a lot of clinical trials is the eligibility criteria is too strict. So all of this long list of stuff that I have on this slide, a lot of times companies, when they're running trials, or like pharma sponsors, they'll literally copy and paste from a protocol that they used 10 years ago in that indication and just use the same one, and they just never update it. And there's no like medical rationale maybe for excluding someone with diabetes or heart disease, or on liver medication. But a lot of times people are excluded for those reasons. I think that this is also changing. So a similar problem is with people with brain metastases have historically had a hard time enrolling in clinical trials, because there are some issues with like the blood-brain barrier, which has been a problem with certain drugs. But in a lot of cases, like research teams just copy and pasted the old protocol, and they don't want to change it, and they don't want to deal with people. So there's been a lot of pushback in the industry, I would say, about that. But I think you're right. I asked that question, and I think that this kind of aspect of trial design means that populations that are more likely to have certain comorbidities are then unfairly excluded and in a selected way. And I think it's a really big barrier and one reason why trials are not diverse. So I think the companies are now aware that if they want to have a more diverse sample of patients, they might need to relax the eligibility criteria, but I think there's a lot of resistance still to doing that. Dan, I don't know if you agree.
Yeah. And this is a great question, and I think a really important topic where, so I'm going to present why pharma does this, and I'll be very honest and concrete. So pharma's goal is to get a medication through clinical trials and to the market as quickly as possible. They will most of the time say that this is because they want to make the treatment available more quickly, and that's very true, but it's also the way that they recoup their expenses for running the trial. It is easier for them to get a drug to trial if they only test it in relatively healthy patients, because they can, any other thing like a brain metastasis or a comorbidity will introduce a something that has to be accounted for by the number of patients that are in the trial. And so in the case of brain metastases, what the pharma is worried about is that people will die at higher rates because they have brain metastases, which is a pretty deadly form of cancer once it spreads to the brain. And that if they die at higher rates while they're on the drug, that the drug won't show its true benefit. And so they'll have to wait longer to see that true benefit, enroll more patients, and the trial will take longer. So there is a need to convince pharma, and this is something that's probably going to happen at the level of the government stepping in and saying, we need to allow more patients in. It may lengthen how long a trial has to go. It may make the trial more difficult to do, but it's important to understand how this drug impacts people who are in different places in their treatment. And so brain mets are a great example. I think there has been some loosening of companies wanting to do more research in this space, but that is truly the reason, is that it's a company weighing the benefits of moving quickly and the amount of money they can make more quickly to the potential for not showing as good benefits and maybe not getting FDA approval because of that. So it's this it's a battle that we have to fight as advocates in order to get pharma to say, we'll accept everyone into this trial. We will subgroup and so do sub-analyses. So for the people with brain mets, there'll be a subset of patients, and we'll look at the effect of this drug in those patients. And it's same with ethnicities and different races and different genetic types, same kind of thing. But we need to move that now, and we're starting now that there's been some insight into that. I think changes are on the move, but they haven't quite gotten there yet. I'll pause there.
I think I said 2017 or 2018, the FDA recommended this kind of sub-analysis, but they haven't mandated it. So it's just a recommendation. And I think some, maybe like 10%, definitely less than 30% of companies do this kind of data analysis. So it's still a long way to go. But I would say to anyone who does have comorbid conditions and is interested in looking at trials, if you go on Ancora and search with us, we basically take patients through a very short questionnaire. So you answer some questions about your comorbidities, and then you'll only see trial results that are accepting patients with those. Which, I mean, if you're looking through ClinicalTrialscom and you have to go through 200 pages like that, and then like throw out all the ones that have, diabetes or liver disease or whatever, it's really frustrating. So we take a lot of the load off of you, so make it easy to look if that's still of interest.
Iris, did we answer your question, or was there another element you'd like to discuss? Just, okay. We're good? Cool. Okay. Back to you, Emily.
Awesome. So I will go back to this beautiful slide deck. Can you see it again? I think so. Okay, so now we've talked about how hard it is to find a trial, which is already a barrier for most normal people to go through that kind of information. So apart from that, I mean, only, like Dan said, 3 to 5% of people diagnosed with cancer participate in trials. And that rate is actually a lot lower in certain groups. So if you look at the US, African Americans are 5% or less of trial participants, Asians 3%, Hispanics less than 5%. This is similar in other countries around the world too. And so the representation of these racial groups, and it's not just these, it's many other groups as well, on trials is disproportionately low compared to their representation in the general population. And maybe it seems like this wouldn't matter because it's just biology, but it really, really, really does matter. And Dan's already talked about some of the reasons why. But basically, in a nutshell, if we don't study the medicine or new treatment in the population where it's going to be used, then some not nice things can happen. Like it could be not safe in certain people, certain types of people, could be less effective, could be more effective as well. That's also been discovered in some cases when a drug has been rolled outside of a study population to the wider population. And really importantly in cancer, I mean, we all know in certain groups of people, certain cancers have a much higher incidence rate or a much higher death rate. And so when you're, testing a prostate cancer drug, for example, and we know that, Black men are much more likely to have aggressive prostate cancer. Like, of course, you think you should test that in that group. You should have a high representation of people who are Black men on that trial, but that's just not been the case historically. Again, I think this is hopefully changing, but it's slow. So this is a key reason why we were really excited about, working on Ancora to try to change this and help more people find out about trials. So one example of how we're doing that is on the bottom here. So I don't know if anyone knows the Tiger Lily Foundation, but we've actually recently just integrated our search portal into their website. So anyone going, they're an organization that's focused on young Black women with breast cancer. And now anyone who goes to their website can find clinical trials directly there when they're looking for other information. So maybe they hadn't thought about trials, but now it's, it's just in their page when they're looking for a support group or something else. So we're trying to do more of this. We have some other partners where we're doing similar things, and we're really excited just to make that more accessible, because I think the lack of awareness itself is just a big barrier. And just to talk, oh, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Can you go back one? So I would love to comment on this too. I think the question, based on the question I was asked and how where this is going, I would just like to make the comment that this kind of thing is not going to change until there's some socioeconomic change and also changes in systemic racism. A lot of the ability to be in a trial is to have the money, the time, the wherewithal to find it and access. And so lack of medical access is a huge, huge reason why a lot of African Americans in this country do not get the care they need. They're not getting screened early enough. So a lot of them, when they do develop cancer, it's not getting caught until a later stage. And a lot of that has to do with the system. And getting patients into a part of the system where they can get access to care earlier, where they can get screened earlier, is going to be really, really important. And there are elements of education, there are elements of accessibility that need to be solved as well. And I think what you guys are doing, Emily and Cora, is trying to cover one of those, but there's so many other parts too that need to be made up for, and that we really need to do better at, the healthcare system and physicians, getting the word out, going into communities that have been underrepresented in clinical trials to make sure that people understand what's going on, to increase and improve people's feelings toward the healthcare system in general. We don't have a great history in this country of how we have treated people of color in clinical trials and in research. And so overcoming those trust issues is going to be a huge, huge part of making this go away, of making it so trials are more representative. So whenever this is brought up, I just can't help myself but bring up this point, because it's such a huge thing to solve, and it's so important that we solve it. And there's so many moving pieces, but by bringing people together, like we're doing, Gryt and Ancora, and patients and advocates and physicians, hopefully can move the needle on this.
Absolutely. So I wanted to also outline a few of the other barriers. There's a ton of them, as we've just discussed. So the first one is just information being really hard to find and understand for average people. Stigma around participation because of the nasty history, Tuskegee experiments, and many other examples in the US, which victimize people. Also mistrust to medical professionals can be a barrier if patients don't feel comfortable with their doctor, don't have a diverse or representative healthcare team. They can feel less comfortable asking questions or getting more involved in their treatment pathway. Similarly, bias in the medical profession is still a really big problem. And so when you look at who clinical trials are offered to, it's not necessarily every patient that could benefit. It's doctors might have some bias, and we know this is the case where they're not offering it to certain kinds of people who they think maybe they won't understand the consent information, or maybe just because of being from a certain racial group, they would be not interested in participating in a trial. So actually just lack of physician offering is probably barrier number one. And then lack of awareness about how trials work can make people uncomfortable. All of the financial burdens, potential insurance issues to navigate, transportation. So important to note that trials are typically free. So the trial sponsor would pay for the drug, the appointments for the trial, but it can be sometimes challenging to then kind of organize your typical standard doctor's appointments around that and figure out what's paid for, what's not paid for. And parking can be even a big barrier for patients and financially toxic, as they're saying now in the industry. And then I think some of the common myths of how people understand clinical trials. So a lot of people think, oh, I might get a placebo, so I don't want to do that, which we know in cancer is really not going to be the case. And if you were going to get a placebo, you would be 100% aware of that in the consent process. So there's no risk that you'd be tricked. People feel like a guinea pig, then maybe they're not being protected, or if the trial doesn't work for you, or you don't want to continue, that you'd have no choice and you'd be stuck. Whereas actually in reality, you can leave a trial anytime just because you want to. You just say you don't want to participate anymore, and there's no, ethically, no one can make you participate in a trial. And then, like we've already talked about, this really outdated eligibility criteria can also keep people out of trials. So I don't have solutions for all of these. I think it's important to highlight that they exist and that they disproportionately affect certain groups of people. So it's even more important, I think, as individuals and as patients, that we're telling people we know about trials as an option, that we're sharing this information, that we're trying to raise awareness, trying to give people the resources to find trials. And then on the right here, I just direct you to this great video that Megan Clare, who's on the call, I believe, did with us for Black History Month this year. Hi, Meg. Please go and watch it. It's less than 10 minutes long, I think, or maybe less than 15 minutes long. And it's really just about how we can drive diversity in clinical research, and also, what you deserve as a patient, and what your healthcare professional also should be responsible to do. Starting with, I think, just listen to people. So I really love that video, and I think Megs, you're doing an awesome job in raising awareness about this issue. I'll stop here for another second.
Emily, it looks like Eileen had a great question about establishing ethical review boards for clinical trial oversight, and ones that also include community members along with patient advocates who are already included in the process to help ensure safety in research. I think you make a great point, Eileen, that the mistrust is warranted. So right now, the way that clinical trials are done, let's take a major academic center, for instance. So when the sponsor of the trial, which is either company or the government or an advocacy organization, when they submit a trial to that university that's going to be done there, there's a group called the Institutional Review Board that is an ethics committee. In the past, this has always included other doctors who are really senior at the hospital. It might include ethicists who understand very much how clinical research has been done and are very familiar with practices have been a problem in the past, and it has included community people to bring in, but what it hasn't done is it's tried to bring a diverse group of people to make a quick decision rather than involving more people to make potentially a more rounded decision, which I think is what you're getting at, Eileen, is that really bringing community members and people who might not be experts in the field yet to get their questions about the trial answered is really, really important. And right now it's just something that's not being done. We're still going to patient experts for most of this information rather than to patients themselves, to a general patient. And that's something that does need to change. It's kind of this, right now we're in this transition stage in this. And I hope that we can move towards exactly what you're saying, of having more larger committees, of having a community committee that can comment on how these trials are done. I don't know, Emily, if there's something else that you wanted to add to that.
No, I think I totally agree. It's perfect. I see a comment here from, I was on the NCI Alliance in Clinical Trials, and so they are involving patients, which is really awesome. So I can jump back in. I think we're almost done with the slides. Don't worry, guys. So I wanted to talk about how you actually find trials. So I think you have kind of two ways. You can ask your healthcare team, and you can look for them yourself and empower yourself to do that. And I think everyone should be doing both. Even if you don't think a trial is right for you right now, maybe you're NED, maybe you're on treatment that's working and you have it figured out. I think it's really important to just empower yourself with information and have an honest conversation with your doctor, because you'll be prepared then for, you know, anything in the future. And maybe a new trial starts that is some amazing, highly targeted therapy for, you know, a genetic mutation that you have, and you'll know that it's there and you can ask about it. So I think on the healthcare team side, just really want to emphasize, just because your doctor hasn't mentioned it doesn't mean it's a good idea. Hopefully your doctors are all amazing and your oncologist has brought up trials and talked to you about them already, but I just know from the data, for most people, that's not the case. And for most people, that's not because trials are a bad idea. It's because doctors just really don't have the time to go through ClinicalTrialsgov for every patient, which is why we've built now a tool for doctors to try to do a better job at this. But it doesn't hurt to ask. And I would ask early, and I would ask again at different points as well, because the trial landscape can change, new things can happen in research. And also maybe you get some new information, maybe you progress, maybe you have new genetic testing that's been done, and this can open up different trial possibilities at different stages. And the earlier you ask, the more likely you are to have different range of options where you fit the eligibility criteria. And maybe your oncologist isn't receptive to this. You can always get a second opinion. You can always switch doctors. You can fire your doctor, as I think Megan Claire has said before. It's totally okay to do. But also you can engage other resources like nurse navigators and social workers who can be really great to sit down with you and really talk through this in a way that is a little bit more patient maybe. So Dan, I don't know if as a doctor you have any other tips here.
Yeah, I would love to comment on this too. I think I saw Danette, you had left a few comments earlier around you have an earlier stage cancer that hasn't really gotten to the point where your doctor might be thinking about an experimental medication. The other thing I want to emphasize is that clinical trials don't just look at drugs. A lot of them look at behavioral changes. A lot of them look at ways to prevent cancer from ever happening. So for instance, if you're in remission, there will be trials that look at potential ways to keep you in remission and to prevent the cancer from coming back. Those may be drug trials, but they also may be trials of exercise and its impact. They may be trials on people who quit smoking, who might have been smokers before and now quit. And we're trying to understand what's the risk of recurrence in that patient population. So there are always these options. It doesn't have to just be a medication. And it doesn't have to just be a phase 3 trial, and it doesn't have to just be a trial for preventing a relapse or preventing a disease. It can be someone who's currently healthy, and we want to make sure that they never get cancer. There are a ton of trials like that are looking at diagnostics and making sure that they can really they can monitor people over time through blood tests and see if how do these people develop cancer, and if they do, can we quickly treat it before it becomes an actual tumor? So, and that's that's important to understand. I want, Danette, what I want you to get from that is that even if you feel like your cancer isn't at the point where an experimental treatment might be necessary, there is a potential trial available for you that will look at something different. Yeah, you're welcome. I know there was also a great question, or maybe I saw it somewhere else. If your doctor doesn't know about the trial, can they call to get you on? So I would say that the primary way right now that people get into trials is that their doctor presents an option to them. Their doctor takes the initiative to call the trial site, to get them an appointment, to get the patient there. What people like Emily and Ancora are trying to do is to give the patient the power to find the trial, to call the trial site themselves and make an appointment and get in. There's always going to be a threshold to activity, to getting on the trial. Historically, it's been the doctors overcome that. Now patients have the tool to do that. So if your doctor is not telling you about a trial, if your doctor, it may be because they're too busy, it may be because they don't think you qualify and they don't know all the trials that are available. It'd be impossible for one person to know that. You can always go on sites like Ancora, find a trial and tell your doctor about it. If they're still not willing to contact or to let you know why you may or may not be a candidate, then you can just call directly. The trial sites will be happy to explain to you, to go through your eligibility criteria. They want to have you in their trial because, again, it behooves them to get patients in to more quickly test the drug, to more quickly get it to market. So they have both a monetary incentive and a health incentive to get you in. So there's always people to call, and there's a bunch of resources as well through people like the NCI that operate a call center where they can answer some questions about a particular trial or help you find one. So there's so many resources out there. You can always, you can call me, you can email Gryt, and I'll help you find a trial too. So I just want to comment on that, and hopefully that answers those questions. And I'm happy to go into more detail about some ways that, other ways that you can find trials too. Back to you, Emily.
Yeah. I would just add, I don't think we've ever seen a situation where the patient and doctor were like fighting about one thought they should do a trial and one thought they shouldn't. That's not like how I envision it. It's we see Ancora as a tool that a patient can use to bring the options to the doctor. So to cut out some of that work for them if they haven't had a look already, and just to come with some ideas and talk about them. So yeah, definitely involve your healthcare professional. If you feel like you're not getting what you need, then go to these other resources as well. And you're always welcome to email me as well. I'll share my details at the end. But you can always get that short list to at least start the conversation and go talk to your doctor. I think a lot of people feel like their doctor will think they're questioning their authority, so they're afraid to ask. And I would think it's a very bad doctor that would be upset to have a question asked like that. And it's totally normal that people feel uncomfortable, but you should ask. And I have a friend who's a neurosurgeon, and his hospital, they have a campaign right now where they have posters everywhere that say it's okay to ask. And I just love it because I think people need to know it's okay. Definitely just ask, and you're not like saying they're wrong. It's just to have a conversation. I would also encourage you, when you're looking at trials, it's not just about the treatment. It's not just about the actual, eligibility criteria, design of the study. It's also like, find out, is this trial going to work for your life? If you have little kids and you don't want to be away from them to travel, or if you have work that you don't want to take time off, like these are all important questions to ask. And a lot of times people are very focused on just, what is the mechanism of the drug? What's the science? But there's a lot more to it than that. So make sure you're asking about those things as well. And I'll just jump forward. I think this is my last slide. Just wanted to share, so I think a main thing as well is maybe a trial is not right for you right now. I think there was a question, like why would I look right now if I'm doing well on my treatment? I think it's always good to have this kind of option in your arsenal for the future. And one thing that we offer on Ancora is these kind of auto alerts, so you can set up your search and then you can just get emails if any trials come up that are a good fit over time. So you don't have to continue doing the work. Or if something changes, you get a new genetic test, you can kind of update your profile and then it will change. So it makes it really easy. But we have some other resources. We'll actually share this, I think, after the session today, this list of questions. If you are talking to a trial site, some suggestions of what you could ask. We have a lot of resources on our website, an FAQ page, a blog with a lot of information, a really active YouTube channel, social media, and I would encourage you to check out our website and let me know if you have any questions at all. And I think that's it. So I know we're almost done for the day, but if there's any remaining questions, happy to talk through them.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. So as Emily mentioned, different resources, links. I know we talked about a few different websites. I will make sure all of that gets included into my follow-up email that you can expect in a week and a half. I have some follow-up information because there were extra questions we didn't quite get to, and that's fine. I will work with Dan on those and get those answers out to you folks. And I wanted to remind you, after this program, we will have the registration up and open for part 2 of our research program series, which will actually touch on patient experience research. And to give you a little highlight of that, I wanted to touch on one question that I saw from Jason, who said, how can we get patients more involved in clinical trial planning? The patient voice and experience doesn't seem to be included until after the planning has already taken place, almost like an afterthought. Dan, so I don't know if you wanted to touch on that for just a very quick minute, but we will be talking a lot about this for part 2 of our program happening on August 25th.
Yeah, I would love to, Lauren. I have to admit I was typing in the chat and didn't hear the whole question. Can you just repeat that really quick?
Yeah, so Jason in the chat had asked about patient experience research and patients getting involved in clinical trial planning, and that sometimes seems the voice and experience of the patient doesn't seem to be included until after planning has already taken place.
Yeah, so this is going to be a big topic, Jason, for our for next month's. Really, the way that this is changing is by involving patients in qualitative research projects, which is exactly what we do at Gryt. This is our bread and butter, is to bring patients in to talk about their experience and to give them a way to impact trials earlier in development. So we have a couple things that we're working on to do this. One is patient-reported outcome measures, which we want to get into more trials. These are ways that patients can, basically they're trial endpoints that are based on the level of importance of certain aspects of treatment to patients. And so what I mean by that is that things like physical functioning, things like your mental health are finally coming in and having an impact. And the way that those are happening is by asking patients about them. But it's really, these are now outcome measures for a drug. So it's not just does a drug shrink the tumor, it's does the drug make your quality of life better? And so as more trials start to involve these measures, and again, this is another area where some companies and sites are better than others at involving these, but that's something that we're trying to work on at Gryt. Another thing is crowdsourcing trials so that we can talk about the design at an earlier time point and that patients can have an impact on giving companies, the government, more input on what they would want to see in a trial. So we'll talk much more about this at our next month's, but I love the question, Jason, and I'm so thankful that you asked it. I'd love to go into more detail.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks everyone for all the questions. Like I said, email coming in a week to a week and a half with lots of links, how to register for part 2 and 3. But I wanted to go ahead and thank the Gryt Health Cancer community for showing up today and asking great questions. I know you guys are always eager for information, so thank you. And thank you to our speakers, Dr. Dan Platt, Gryt Health's Chief Medical Officer, and definitely a big thank you to Emily for presenting information on Ancora.ai and to that organization for just being a great partner to Gryt Health. And as it was mentioned in the chat, Ancora and those services are free for patients. So be on the lookout for a follow-up email, and thank you everyone for a great hour together. Have a good day.